In this video, I'm going to be talking about creepypastas. Now, creepypastas are short online horror stories that are posted on the internet. The word creepypasta is a spin-off of the other internet word slang copypasta, which is just any post that has been copied and pasted and posted on many forums. There's no definitive start to the genre, but it generally is thought to have started in 2001 with the emergence of internet forums in popularity, and it peaked at around 2010 and is now kind of in this medium phase. The definition of what exactly counts as a creepypasta is widely debated within the community, but I think the essential parts of what makes a creepypasta is the first-person narrative perspective, that these are all personal stories that people are telling about themselves or about people they know or about things that they know within their reality. And that given that these are forum posts, they're largely uncensored, unregulated, and with more of an emphasis on sharing a story rather than writing a quality piece. Because creepypastas are essentially supposed to be true stories, even if sometimes they have aspects that seem pretty far from believable. A part of the experience is suspending disbelief and allowing yourself as the reader to allow this to enter your reality. Creepypastas exist in what I'd like to call a circular reality. They feed on real things, insist on their own reality, and sometimes in turn have a real-world impact. The way creepypastas present themselves is essential to them being able to establish themselves in reality. For example, the opening line of the creepypasta Ben Drowned is, "Okay, I need your help with this. This is not a copypasta. This is a long read, but I feel like my safety or well-being could very well depend on this." So that's a very common hook for creepypastas, talking directly to the audience as if they're in conversation with the audience. And so many of the stories are like this, in this kind of first person, this is this distressing, traumatic thing that's happening to me and I'm sharing it on the internet. And then we have an example like the web series Marble Hornets, where it establishes itself by using real life B-roll-esque footage of just people walking around in the woods, documenting their own lives, allegedly. And so these two things, what we can get out of this is they really establish the relationship between the author and the audience directly, and this relationship is essential for distinguishing creepypastas from other versions of horror stories. One of the ways that creepypastas connect to our reality is by feeding on things that we're nostalgic for and then perverting them. It's really common for there to be creepypastas of cartoons' lost episodes or video games being haunted. So one example of a lost episode is a story called Squidward's Suicide. So this comes from an unknown author who posted on a forum and claimed to be an ex-intern at Nickelodeon Studios and who was working on a final cut of an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants when they received some corrupted file that showed a lot of classic elements of the lost episode subgenre as opposed to normal SpongeBob episode elements. And these elements are characters acting strangely, the animation going choppy or weird, eerie music, loud distortion of sounds, and moments of dead silence or wind, a lot of blood, which is very common, and another very significant common element is the intercutting of images of mangled bodies, specifically here the mangled body of a dead child, and then in the end, Squidward shoots himself. And the story itself, the poster leaves the post very open-ended. There's no real resolution. He just seems to say, "This happened," and then leave it at that. And the reason that this is so popular is that it speaks very directly to the demographic that was likely reading like these kind of online posts at the time that this was posted. There is kind of a morbid interest, I think, that people have to like unearthing like darkness and innocent and nice seeming things. So I think this speaks to like that desire. And that also speaks to there is a whole lot of Disney-based creepypasta content. There's so many stories revolving around Disney parks and secret places in Disney parks and like dead-eyed characters, and like there's a secret Cold War bunker under the entire park where they cemented in a bunch of innocent people and stuff like that. But there, and it's so easy with the Disney Corporation too, because there's already that element of potential skeletons in the closet and very real nastiness. So I think that kind of satisfies that desire as well to kind of see that come out. And Disney also has a lost cartoon creepypasta called suicidemouse.avi, which is very similar to Squidward Suicide and like the kind of elements. But in this case, it starts from a place of a forum post saying, hey, does anyone know about this Mickey Mouse cartoon that I've heard of but never seen? And this is interesting because it mirrors almost directly real life situations where it's very common that forums will get people coming in and saying, hey, I have this very vague memory of something I watched on TV as a child. Does anyone else remember this? And two very notable examples of this are Nickelodeon's Clockman short and Sesame Street's Cracked short, which both had very kind of like long journeys of these people like coming together and trying to like find this traumatic short that they watched as a child. And this is what Candle Cove, one of the most famous creepypastas, picks up on and runs with very successfully. It takes the exact format of this kind of forum posting and develops a very simple but very engaging story based on does anyone remember this kid show, eventually leading to the plot twist that it wasn't a real show and it was just static. And this is something that could only be told in this kind of online forum form. The thing about Candle Cove is that it wasn't trying to be dramatic. It wasn't trying to do anything. It was representing the situation in the exact way that it would happen in real life, and that gave it the edge that it had, and that made it disturbing. Another way creepypastas make themselves real is through how they interact with real-world horror. Some creepypastas present a modified version of real-life events as truth, which the anonymity of the internet allows them to do. And that some creepypastas use the platform to shed a light on real-world issues. One example of this is revolves around the story of the Alice killings, which is supposedly about unsolved serial killings in Japan between the years 1999 and 2005. It's presented like any other creepypasta, no references, no anything, this is what happened. But people who did research found that if you look at the MO of the killer in this story, it matches very similarly to the MO of a real-life serial killer, Alfredo Galan, who was also called the playing card killer, which is essential to the story, and who was really killing people in Spain. It's not uncommon for a horror story or a serial killer story to be based on a true story. But the distinction here, the uniqueness, is that the creepypasta is posted completely devoid of any context and insisting that this is a true story, despite the fact that it has this connection to a real-world event. And then we have something like Petscop, which is actually an almost entirely unique experience within the creepypasta community right now. It's 100% original. It's a video game watch playthrough, but the game is not based on any real life game. It's 100% created by the creator. Haunted video games is a big subgenre of creepypasta, but unlike other examples like Sonic EXE, which is a demonically possessed video game, or Ben Drowned, which is a dead boy possessed video game, Petscop presents a more complicated, much more nuanced story, and there is a lot of development over the span of the story told through several posted YouTube videos. Learn a lot more about the narrator and how his character plays into what is happening in the game. And while the narrator becomes more and more distant from the audience as the story becomes more complicated and gets more involved, the piece still has a grounding in reality, having based a part of its plot on the real-life story of a young girl named Candace Newmaker, who was suffocated in a rebirthing ceremony, similar to what they discuss in the piece. So, Petscop is able to shine a light on this issue without explicitly making the audience aware that it is referencing this real-life event. Creepypastas are allowed to get away with dealing with real-world issues in this kind of backhanded way because of their format as anonymous online postings. And while many creepypastas take from the real world, some creepypastas have real-world effects. Most famously, the two Wisconsin 12-year-olds who stabbed their friend 19 times to please Slender Man. And so I've talked about the ways that creepypastas are able to work and connect to audiences on a very specific, distinct level from other horror stories and other stories in general. And this separation really becomes very clear when people continue to try and fail at adapting creepypasta stories into the mainstream, into movies and television. Like the 2018 Slender Man movie directed by Sylvian White was a critical disaster. It has an 8% on Rotten Tomatoes. And people were very disconnected about why Slender Man, such an iconic horror figure, wasn't working on the big screen. And so many of the critics were saying things like it was boring, the characters were poorly defined. And the thing is, that should not be a surprise, because Slender Man's not supposed to be a big screen villain or big screen monster. He started in the background of a doctored photo. And that's the issue when trying to adapt these creepypasta stories. It loses their original intent or their original format. And that's so essential to those stories working. And this comes up too with this Sci-Fi Channel's Channel Zero show, which did a different creepypasta for every season that they were airing. Is that they, in order to make the stories work, like their first season was Candle Cove, they had to make up an entire story, totally separate and unrelated horror elements, just to make the story work at all in this medium. And by adapting it, even if a lot of the elements they added were interesting or scary, the original relationship between the writer and the audience is changed dramatically. And that loses the spirit that is creepypasta. And there are mainstream things that capture a bit of that relationship, like the Blair Witch Project or the first Paranormal Activity. But as audiences became acclimated to that type of storytelling, it has lost its power, and it's unlikely that someone would be able to make a movie like that today and pass it off as something that's 100% real. But there are examples of creepypastas being referenced and embraced in surprising ways. In a 2019 episode of SpongeBob SquarePants, the infamous red-eyed Squidward, described in the Squidward suicide creepypasta, popped up briefly in an episode as a little nod to the creepypasta community. Ultimately, the ability of creepypastas to ground themselves in reality and connect the audience to the storyteller in such a direct way sets them apart from other forms of horror storytelling. And this community is important because it creates a safe space for people to just write anything. And having an outlet like that can lead to really interesting things. Thank you.